Diane Hinchcliffe here, VP and Principal Analyst at Constellation Research, covering future of work and CIO issues.
And I'm Doug Henshin, VP and Principal Analyst, covering data to decisions, and we're your co-hosts for episode 31 of CRTV.
And we're here to share the latest news, trends, and features on enterprise technology.
And speaking of those trends, we're going to hear about three of them today, with Diane sharing a deep dive on cross-cloud capabilities. I'll follow that with an update on draft SEC regulations that will require public companies to report their carbon emissions and climate risks. And I'll talk about how tech vendors are gearing up to meet that challenge. And then finally, our Ray Wang will interview Andy Thurai on AI ops trends.
But first, let's get to the news. So, Doug, what's new in your world since the last episode of CRTV?
Well, in recent months, we've seen our own Congress grilling some of those tech executives and making a big show out of concern about data privacy. But the EU is once again taking the big tech firms on head-on with regulations. On March 24th, it passed a Digital Markets Act aimed at preventing these digital giants from using their platforms to box in customers and to quash emerging competition. Now, the new rules go beyond GDPR, which was also groundbreaking regulation. It's going to require Google, for example, to get consent to collect data and use it across their search engine and YouTube. And similarly, Meta, if it wants to target across Instagram and Facebook. Apple is going to have to offer some alternatives to its own app store on iPhones and iPads. And WhatsApp, also owned by Meta, might be required to offer alternatives like Signal and Telegram. And then meanwhile, in a separate announcement by the EU and the Biden administration on March 25th, just the day after this regulation from the EU, they announced a new transatlantic data exchange agreement. And that's going to enable European businesses to exchange consumer data with US-based businesses as long as they provide agreed upon opt-out and privacy safeguards for those EU citizens. Now, they had a prior deal in place, but an EU court struck that down, and then companies like Google and Meta and MailChimp had to scramble to meet these EU privacy safeguards. Privacy hawks are promising that once again they're going to challenge this one. Very hard for American businesses to be doing business in Europe these days because the EU is really leading on these privacy concerns.
Yeah, there's no doubt. The EU has been very aggressive, and they call it the digital decade. It's the time to really start now that we see where all the technology is heading online and what to really do about it. And I think a lot of the focus is good. I mean, it's interesting that the EU is really leading on that, but because they're one of the biggest consumers of American cloud services. And so, the transatlantic data privacy protections is a really tricky one because the EU really doesn't want to be subject to the Patriot Act and other concerns, but this gives them an opt-out for now. And it just leads into really what I have for news, which is the EU is also heading into a important new topic in the realm of artificial intelligence, which is really starting to become an enterprise-wide topic. It's no longer a siloed function. Some departments are doing it, but we're really starting to see enterprise-wide rollouts. We're seeing the platforms emerging to allow companies to really operate their artificial intelligence capabilities across every function that they have and manage it and monitor it and operationalize it. And it's really becoming the next new silo. I'm hearing a lot from IT executives and CIOs, and they're really seeking ways to manage and govern AI more consistently across the enterprise, is what I'm seeing. And again, these tend to be more advanced organizations. But with all these compliance and privacy issues on the rise, the EU is also now, in addition to everything you just said, Doug, is launching an AI Act that will require companies to either ban or retain, for legal reasons, certain models that they use. So if they're identified as doing something particularly important, the law will actually require them to either not use something if it's been proven in court to have bias or do something that violates privacy, or make sure that they understand what happened later on. They can actually have to retain those for a certain amount of time. And so there's no question we're not seeing this kind of leadership anywhere else in the world. And regulations cut both ways. They can help people, but they can hinder innovation. So it's time is going to tell whether the path for all of this and the timing is right. But we're clearly entering an era where societies and governments are really trying to get their arms around these technologies and tame these very, very powerful new tools that we have, and the businesses can inadvertently misuse or even intentionally use to take advantage of their market position. So I have some major new research coming out on how CIOs are trying to grapple with this, but they're anybody who has a global company or sells anything on the global stage is really going to have to get these regulations sorted out, well understood. And I think I'm cautiously optimistic. GDPR has been a real challenge and it's been holding back European companies for sure. So we'll see how this plays out.
Yeah, it is closely related. I mean, you're going to be talking about cross-cloud, multi-cloud capabilities. Our own enterprises want to have safeguards against that platform effect and that platform power. I hear this leadership on regulation sometimes talked about as the Brussels effect. They kind of have a first mover play in regulation. It's easy then for other governments to copy what they're doing. We saw that with GDPR, and companies then rush to comply with that regulation, and they don't want to have to do it different policies for different regions. So it ends up being the de facto regulation for the world. You have to watch what the EU is doing. It's kind of like emissions regulations from California and the U.S., kind of the leading thing. And speaking of the U.S. and California, Google announced a battery of new services this week, including Big Lake, a combined lake warehouse offering, new database migration capabilities, particularly for moving Oracle database workloads, and a new partnership called the Data Cloud Alliance. And on some of these announcements, it seems like Google is responding to competition. The Big Lake service is going after this lakehouse idea that was kind of forged by Databricks and Snowflake, and there are a number of other companies that have announced this combined warehouse. But they're trying to differentiate largely on the openness. Google leading with open use of data formats, for example, Parquet, OCR, whatever you want to use. Tables, they're leading with Iceberg, which is a really hot new emerging standard for tables. And then various engines, Spark, Presto, and their own TensorFlow, as well as SQL, etc. And then on database migration, this has been a continuing theme. Google trying to get those workloads moved over from other databases, other applications. It's really hard work, dislodging Oracle in particular. So they're redoubling their efforts there. And then this Data Cloud Alliance, very interesting. Again, this push on openness. Some of the partners there include Databricks, Deloitte, Dataiku, Neo4j, MongoDB, Starburst. A lot of smallish companies there, certainly independents, notable independents, influential independents. But the real win for openness in my book would be support for more heavyweights. Diane, what else you got?
Apple's been in the news with some really amazing announcements around their custom silicon, which they first introduced just over a year ago with the M1 chip, which is now they're kind of unifying around one chipset. And I remember, I've been using a Mac since 1984, since they first came out. They made the big switch from Motorola to Intel, and that really drove a lot of growth. They moved to higher performance chips, and now they're using basically the same silicon they're using in the iPhone and the iPad. Except they've really put these on steroids. So these new high-end M1 Pro and M1 Max chips are really turning heads. And we're seeing data that's driving enterprise demand for Apple that we haven't seen in a long time. And enterprises don't really like Apple because of the manageability issues that you now have to have double everything in terms of desktop support and having applications that run both. And it kind of duplicates everything across the board in terms of what IT has to do. But there's no question that Apple is really showing that their custom silicon bet is paying off. These chips are very high performance, yet they're very low on power consumption. Survey just showed that new hires, up to a third of new hires in the 18 to 34 age demographic, now factor in access to these Apple devices as key to job acceptance. And we haven't seen data like that in quite a while. It used to be the credit really drove that, but now it's, AI professionals. These chips have massive GPUs and they're designed for artificial intelligence and machine learning. And the new Mac Studio line has been very well received. It's high end, but it's priced in a way that's very compelling for the price point. It's probably the most powerful personal computer you can readily buy without building something highly custom for yourself. And so all this is leading the way to gaining market share in the enterprise in a way we haven't seen in a long, long time. And so 2022, it looks like it's going to be shaping up for a banner year for Apple in businesses. And it's helpful that Apple's also been really addressing the IT administration audience. There's a new Apple admin event that they've really expanded to make this easier in the enterprise. And so I think this is good. It provides competition. I think much needed competition to really raise everyone's game. But the key is what we're seeing, this big trend in custom silicon to drive significant price performance increases and new capabilities around specifically AI and ML, which is so big right now in business. So it's something to really watch closely this year. And if you're an IT executive or a CIO, plan to incorporate more Apple devices into your mix this year.
Well, I saw the 10-core and 20-core chips in the Mac Studio, amazingly powerful. $2,000. I thought, oh, wow, that's an expensive PC. But then I thought about, laptop prices. I'm like, okay, well, if you're working from home and you don't need to, you're a creative type, you're probably going to love that option.
Well, if you had a PC and you dropped in a high-end GPU, one of the top NVIDIA boards, which is still not as powerful technically as the M1 Max, you're going to be spending more than a Studio. So it's actually priced decent. So we'll see.
All right, well, that's it for this week's news summary. Next, Diane offers a deep dive on not just multi-cloud, but cross-cloud capabilities. Then I'll take a closer look at these SEC draft rules and how tech vendors are going to support environmental, social, and governance initiatives. And then finally, Ray Wong interviews our own Andy Thurai on AI ops trends. So keep on watching.
Hi, this is Diane Hinchcliffe, VP and Principal Analyst with Constellation Research. And today we're going to talk about cross-cloud and why it's central to cloud strategy today for most organizations. So first, let's talk about how cross-cloud is different than the notion of multi-cloud, which is a more generic concept that is taking the industry by storm because, arguably every company is a multi-cloud organization today. But multi-cloud doesn't talk about what happens when you actually have these clouds situated in your organization, your commercial clouds, your private clouds, and how do you make them work together? How do you manage them together? How do you modernize applications together? And so cross-cloud articulates a vision for modernizing applications and managing cloud infrastructure across a multi-cloud environment, or multi-cloud could also be, and often is talking about the silos of cloud that you have in your organization. And so the key is in regarding multiple clouds, both commercial and private, as a single integrated operating unit. That's really the big differentiator. So if we talk about the different roles that are affected by cross-cloud, and I work with CIOs and IT departments all the time on their multi-cloud strategies, the CIO, of course, is the one with the biggest stake across all the clouds that are inside an organization. That's commercial hyperscalers, that's SaaS services and their APIs, that's private cloud that you have inside your organization. And they really care about time to value, complexity management, the governance and security of all those clouds, the total cost of everything across that cloud estate. And they probably have the biggest stake in cross-cloud because it offers the biggest efficiencies, the most agility. Of course, the Chief Information Security Officer is affected as well. Cross-cloud articulates the vision of saying, how do we create an integrated zero-trust security environment? And so cross-cloud stands to benefit that role quite a bit. The cloud architect also has a significant role in cross-cloud because you have to actually realize it, design for this and say, we're not just going to have all these different clouds separately inside our organization, but we're really going to have a strategy about how we're going to do service delivery and integration and deliver results to the business quicker. And then IT operations, we have to actually, they have a role in making cross-cloud functional and they benefit from cross-cloud as well, right? So consistency across clouds, cross-cloud management, cross-cloud operations in general. And so if we look at an overarching view of cross-cloud, we can see that of all the external applications that a company might be projecting out to its stakeholders, all the internal applications that its workers and contractors and partners use, that if we have a consistent cross-cloud infrastructure in between them, right, that enables the discovery and end-to-end cloud management, observability, a security blanket across everything, an ability to understand cost components across all of them, to integrate them consistently, to orchestrate them and create solutions out of more than one cloud, out of data across those different cloud silos, and make it all compliant. That's what cross-cloud does, is give that single pane of management, the single control plane that everybody really wants with all the different cloud capabilities, and to work with all of the different common cloud platforms and services, and maybe whatever you have uniquely for your organization as well. And so I view cross-cloud as really how to succeed with IT complexity today. That's the big enemy. And the complexity of multiple commercial clouds is already here. So a cross-cloud gives us a vision and the capabilities to really deal with that as a top order challenge with the right tools. And so managing multi-cloud as a series of silos is duplicative, it's uncoordinated, and really isn't sustainable. And so cross-cloud gives us a perspective that unites cloud strategy, application development, management, governance, operations across full cloud estate, and gives that highly sought after single control plane. And the good news is that there are proof points emerging. The German stock exchange has had significant success using a cross-cloud model to cope with the different clouds that it has been using, and they achieved much better service monitoring, faster troubleshooting of where is the actual problems actually occurring, because we're looking across our clouds, a simplified IT management, and they really were able to get out of the weeds of operation because things were working better, and they're able to troubleshoot problems and operate more seamlessly, and they could focus more on innovation, and that was one of the big value adds. They could actually move with agility and tackle new problems in a way they couldn't before. And so the notion of multi-cloud is necessary. It's what we have to start thinking about in general with cloud strategy, but it's insufficient for the modern enterprise is the argument. And so how do we produce software better? How do we do it more quickly? How do we do it with multiple mutually integrated clouds without adding new management burdens or introducing risks? And so the speeding delivery of modern applications that draw resources from multiple clouds, we can simplify operations and get that single point of control. We can maximize the value of using cloud by tapping into resources across them, and we can ensure one consistent vision and model for security, right? So cross-cloud zero trust is a big model. And so how do we get there? How do we achieve cross-cloud? And so we see that the only practical way is to do it at the platform level within your cloud architecture. And vendors are strongly positioned because they've been building so many systems to help with management and orchestration across all of these clouds. And they have highly varied experience across many industries in building architectures. And so cross-cloud architectures, and they have the applications capabilities now from all that experience to provide to us ready to use. And they're hardened and matured into a robust set of capabilities. So cross-cloud platforms are starting to emerge that have all of this, that gives us this ability that we can put on top of our clouds as an umbrella to really make them manageable and governable. And so, there's proof points here. We see cross-cloud emerging broadly as a set of readily available commercial services now, except we just don't know to ask for it. We're just still trying to develop the terminology around all of this. VMware has cross-cloud services with Carbon Black Cloud and Tanzu, and really a whole portfolio of cross-cloud services. Red Hat OpenShift has been offering something similar, sitting on top of the hyperscalers like Amazon, Azure, and so on. And Snowflake is doing the same thing with data, and their cross-cloud data services really take the same notion from a slightly different angle. And so cross-cloud is now a critical organizing principle for cloud strategy for virtually every IT organization now. IT does not have, and it doesn't need, the budget to take on the risk of managing multiple clouds in silos. That's hard work and not necessary. And so we can use cross-cloud as a model as a continuum across our organization, so we can adopt it, a step at a time. You don't have to suddenly go all cross cloud, but you can move in a cloud at a time, or services or applications at a time. And so enlightened IT leaders are elevating their thinking. They're using cross cloud to better organize and position their cloud estates for maximum agility, versatility, lower costs, and ability to innovate more rapidly. And so it's a breakthrough in thinking that can be used to mature our organizations around the way that we're using multi-cloud. It's a more practical way of saying about how do I take all these clouds and get the most value with least amount of effort. And IT and businesses can come together and use it as a vital way forward to mature enterprise cloud capabilities and make them more successful. And so I think cross-cloud offers not just a better model, but a practical set of platforms and tools and capabilities that allow us to get much more out of cloud, to actually handle much more complexity, because we're going to have more applications and services, not less, and really deliver on the promise of cloud that we were always hoping for. Thank you very much.
Hi, this is Doug Henschen of Constellation Research, and as part of my Data to Decisions coverage, I've added technologies tied to reporting on and analyzing environmental, social, and governance initiatives. Now, until this year, reporting around ESG initiatives has been voluntary, but that's about to change with mandatory requirements soon expected for public companies. The mandate in the U.S. is coming from the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, which on March 21 issued draft regulations. Once adopted, these rules will require U.S. public companies to disclose their greenhouse gas emissions and climate risks. The SEC says it's adopting these rules because investors want reliable data to help them understand environmental practices and climate risks. As evidence, a record $71 billion flowed into U.S. ESG-focused funds in 2021, and an estimated one-third of global assets are now tied to ETFs and mutual funds that measure sustainability. There are also risks tied to climate change, such as the prospect of carbon taxes or the risk to climate-sensitive industries, such as agriculture, construction, real estate, transportation, hospitality, and others. The SEC's draft rules are not final. There will be a 60-day comment period, and groups including the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the oil and gas industry are expected to push back hard. The most contentious rule is a requirement to report Scope 3 emissions of CO2 and methane. While Scope 1 and Scope 2 cover direct emissions, Scope 3 covers indirect downstream use of a company's products. In the oil and gas industry, for example, Scope 1 and Scope 2 covers emissions during exploration, drilling, transport, refining, and distribution. Scope 3 would include emissions by consumers and industry as they burn the fuel or gas supplied by the oil or gas company. Environmentalists argue that Scope 3 emissions typically account for the most significant portion of greenhouse gases, so they can't be ignored. Business and industry groups argue that clear and consistent methodologies for measuring Scope 3 emissions are lacking. With this in mind, the SEC's draft rule includes a safe harbor provision on Scope 3 reporting and exemptions for smaller companies. Another legal battle is likely to emerge around what measures should be considered material to a business's financial performance. Nonetheless, most experts expect the SEC to adopt Scope 1 and Scope 2 rules at a minimum, and to phase them in over the next 3 years, starting in 2023. Now, the SEC's announcement came as no surprise, and global companies are also well aware that climate reporting rules will be introduced this year by the IFRS Foundation, which guides public company financial reporting in 144 countries. The fact is that industry-leading companies, fast followers, and even cautious adopters are already reporting ESG-related measures. In fact, 92% of Fortune 500 companies already disclose data tied to climate issues, but they do so using a variety of voluntary standards. One benefit of regulation is that it will ensure consistent reporting across all public companies. That will give investors and the public uniform, comparable data that will ensure that companies are not just greenwashing with selective disclosures. Technology will be crucial to not just reporting ESG data, but to harnessing it for strategic and operational planning and business differentiation. Leading companies that have embraced voluntary reporting are already taking advantage of cost reductions that come with operating more efficiently. They are also winning new customers and investors. The good news for tech vendors and companies that are late to the ESG game is that they can now focus on just two emerging sets of regulations coming from the SEC and the IFRS Foundation. As for the vendors that have been ahead of the curve with ESG supporting software, companies like Servest, Invisi, Insight Software, Planetly, Wolters Kluwer, Watershed, and Workiva, they will retain first mover advantages because they know how to gather and report climate data. They know where their customers have struggled, and they've refined their software and services to help customers with reporting and adapting to meet ESG goals. In recent weeks, I've had briefings with several vendors that are clearly gearing up to support ESG initiatives, including Anaplan, C3, OneStream, Salesforce, Sage, and SAP. The bottom line in the SEC's draft regulation is that it's time to prepare, if you haven't already, for an era of mandatory climate impact and climate risk reporting. Now, from my perspective, it's best to take a proactive approach and use technology to turn these requirements to your own advantage. This is Doug Henshin of Constellation Research.
Hey everybody, this is a brand new series on Constellation TV. We are focusing on 5 minutes with an analyst. Our first analyst here is Andy Thurai. 5 minutes with Andy. Let's jump in real quick. How you doing, Andy?
Great.
So
good to be with you.
You are like on AI, ML ops, all these kind of topics. It's been something you've been covering with passionately for quite some time. So I'm going to ask you a question everyone keeps asking me. Why are AI ops and ML ops different? Like, aren't these all the same?
No, well, unfortunately, no, because as you and I talked about, some legacy analysts call they are similar, and that's what people are going with. But they're totally different. If you look at it, ML ops is about after creating a machine learning models or AI models, how do you get that into production? The stages of moving it, productionizing it, security, governance. How do you make ML AI models properly on production is what ML ops is all about. But AI ops is the exact opposite. It's about how do you use AI and ML to better your IT operations.
Oh, wow.
It's a totally different
really
field.
different. Okay, so everyone
Totally
keeps
different.
confusing this. And okay, so you're clarifying this. So what's driving the demand for AI ops? Like, why are people asking for this?
Yeah, so a couple of things. One is, the last report we talked about it, it's unfortunately when the digital maturity forced everybody, or the digital online process forced the digital maturity of CIOs, they figured out a way to quickly survive, throw money, throw warm bodies, have 100 support engineers, what have you, to figure it out, to have that system always on, right? But now the problem is, there was a blank check given to some of this IT operational folks, executive folks, a few years ago, saying that, take how much money you want, keep the business on all the time. Now the board level people are asking a question saying that, why are you taking that much money? How can you make it efficient? Reduce it. You don't need 100 people to support our application. Do it with 20. They got to find ways to do that. And AI ops and incident management are some of the areas that can help them.
Okay, so this is augmenting and automating things in a way that we haven't seen before.
You got it. So AI is nothing but augmented intelligence. It's not artificial intelligence, right?
Not yet. We will get there. So
right.
That's part of it. Okay, so what are CIOs dealing with then, right? Why is this picked up so much, right? What was AI ops solving that we couldn't do before?
Yeah, well, so it's not about solving that we couldn't solve before. I mean, if you think about it, every innovation, there were people who were trying to do it before. I mean, there were people who were going from point A to point B with the horse and buggy or with steam engines. Now you got airplanes, so you can get faster. So it's about a better way of doing things. When you have siloed, distributed operations, when you have too much of tons of data, when you have a new observability tools that's bringing in a ton of data into that, you need to get insights. At the end of the day, if you have an incident, your digital business is up. until you hit one major incident. Once you hit an incident, everything is down. How are you going to get back up? How long it's going to take? Because it's going to cost you a lot, not just by expense wise, but you're talking about, overall the brand hit that you'll take.
Okay, so this is about risk mitigation as much as it is about efficiency.
Yeah, it's efficiency, cost savings, risk mitigation, and how do I keep my business always on? That's very important.
Got it. Okay, so you just put a short list. You got vendors for AI ops. Like, how big is the list? Where should people go to?
So when I started the list, I was talking about 40 vendors-ish. And now in about 6 months, we are about 60 vendors right now, right? And again, if I talk to more vendors, everyone will claim, the legacy vendors will all claim that, I'm doing AIOps perfectly. So the number is anywhere between 8 to maybe 8,000. But I looked at every one of them, or most of them, of course. And about 17 of them I thought was worthy of consideration. So I shortlisted the 17 first. And then after looking at it closely, I think there's about 14 of them. Yeah, that's where we are at now.
We'll check it out. Okay, you can see it on the Constellation shortlist site. Go under Constellation Research, look up shortlist, and you'll see Andy's shortlist there. All right, real quick, final round, 3 things that CIOs should know. Lightning round here.
Okay. That's going to be a tough one to say, but the first thing I say is that, it's AI ops is more than a buzzword. Have a strategy. Just don't use it as coffee room conversations or boardroom conversations or drink time conversations. It's more than a buzzword. Have a strategy. Figure out what use cases you want to implement, and then implement it properly. Have a strategy, execute it. That's 1. And 2, get the CXO level commitment and boardroom commitment, and get the funding for it. You're not going to do some innovation experiment and then try to roll it out. You need to get the traction first. They would even pay for it if you go and tell them how much money you're going to save with that. So that's the second one. And the third one, this is very, very, very important for any CIO. You got to be prepared for a cultural change. IT is about reactive mode now. But using this AI ops, incident management, proper DevOps culture, all of this in place, agile operations methodology will get you into proactive mode. You need to be ready for the cultural change.
You know what? Culture trumps technology all the time. This is very important. Andy, thanks a lot for being here. And of course, check out Andy's research on the ConstellationR.com site, and follow Andy at Andy, THURAI on Twitter. All right. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Bye.
Well, that's a wrap for episode 31 of CRTV. Get set for our next episode coming up in 2 weeks.
That's right. Watch for our co-hosts and Constellation colleagues, Holger Mueller and Liz Miller, who will bring you the next episode of CRTV. In the meantime, be sure to follow us at ConstellationR on Twitter and on LinkedIn, and at CRTV Show.
Thanks for watching, and have a great week.
There we go.
Oh, one more thing.
Sorry.
One more thing. All right. Well, you lead off, Diane.
All right. You ready?
Yep. I'm here with Diane Hinchcliffe, and we're going to shake a few. Shake a few. We're going to shake a few. Share. We're going to share. Try sharing. Okay.
Well, that was easy.
I know. Our big problem, Diane, is no bloopers. We need to say, really effervescent and bubbly things in Liz's case, or like crazy German theories like your liver controls your eyes.